All beings and creatures of the galaxy have something to fear, even the very strongest. For millennia, Sith have been attempting to eradicate their one and only fear, death. It would be Valkorion, the most powerful Sith in history, who would conquer death. But though he was victorious over his own age, he was still not without fear, because the one being he was scared of the most in the entire galaxy was his own daughter. So much so that Valkorion robbed her of her childhood to twist her into a creature that only he could control. Despite her mother's best attempts, Vitiate's daughter Vaylin turned out to be one of the most cataclysmically powerful force wielders in all of history. But what made her so powerful? Why did she inherit so much potential, surpassing even her older brothers, and threatening her father? One of the only beings capable of threatening her father based on her own sheer power. Well, greetings again, lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. Grab a snack and join us today as we open a brand new holocron in the strange world of the Eternal Empire. Today we will be analyzing Vaylin's extraordinary power and potential in the Force, attempting to explain how it happened in the first place, and what sets her apart from her brothers. Vaylin has one of the highest Force potentials in all of Star Wars, and today we're going to break down the strange phenomenon that gave her her power, being a true daughter of Vitiate. Not just Valkorion, but Vitiate as well. Let us explain. In order to explain Vaylin, we will first have to set up the circumstances of her birth. It all begins with her father. He has lived for 1,000 years and has gone by many names, but the two he is best known for is Darth Vitiate and Valkorion. The difference will be made clear in just a moment. To briefly summarize, when the old Sith Empire was destroyed by the Republic, Vitiate had performed a ritual which siphoned all of the Force energy from an entire world, as well as 8,000 Sith in order to empower himself. This gave him monstrous abilities in the Force, as well as everlasting life. Vitiate then took the last secret of his people and journeyed to the world of Jerome and Kos before the Republic could find and destroy them. There, Vitiate built the Sith civilization in secret, taking generations to construct vast cities, navies, and a powerful military. This was all of the goal of returning and destroying the Republic. Over a millennium would pass before he would finally put his sinister plan into action. In the year 3681 BBY, he launched the Great Galactic War. The Republic and the Sith Empire would be at war for 30 years, and in that time, Emperor Vitiate would recluse himself away behind the scenes, allowing the Dark Council to run the Empire and the war in his absence. In truth, Vitiate had lost interest in his empire, believing Sith doctrine to be too limiting for his godlike ambitions. Here he formed a dangerous new opinion. He believed that the Sith way was not conducive to building a lasting rule. Several hundred years prior, he had journeyed into the unknown regions, and there he had found a backwater world by the name of Zakul. Although their people were low technology and superstitious, they housed an ancestral secret. The most advanced navy the universe had ever seen was buried on this world, known as the Eternal Fleet. The fleet had been created by an unknown ancient builder race and left behind. Vitiate would split his consciousness and take over the body of a powerful warrior there by the name of Valkorion. Using Valkorion's body, he assumed his identity and presented himself to the Zakulian people as a figure from their mythos, from their histories, and their ancient way. He then rebuilt their civilization just as he had once done with the Sith, but made it even more advanced and powerful. Soon the Eternal Empire was born, and Valkorion was at its head. During this period, Valkorion would marry a woman by the name of Senya Tiral, one of his fiery Zakulian knights, and he would then sire two children, twins, Arcann and Thexan. Once the boys were born, Vitiate in his Sith Emperor body would call for a ceasefire with the Republic. He desired to focus more of his attention on his newfound family, believing them to be the future of his rule. In response, an 11-year Cold War would ensue between the Republic and the Sith Empire, but Vitiate was spiritually absent. He had turned his full attention to the Eternal Family, and it was during this time that Vaylin would be born, the third of his children. From the beginning, it was clear that she was much different from her brothers, and as she grew, something more sinister became clear. She was different than any other Force wielder before her. While Vaylin was still in the womb, she was moving furniture around the room. As a toddler, she was levitating objects, and Senya once described an event where a guard dropped a ball that she had tossed to him, and as a result, she crippled him. Senya was taking extra care with her daughter because she was upset at how her sons had turned out. From the beginning, Senya showered her twins with affection, but they ignored her, deeply desiring approval from their other parent. But Valkorion would never give it to them. She felt that she had lost her sons to their obsession with their father's acknowledgement. So Senya desired to teach Vaylin to enjoy life aside from using the Force. Although the young girl enjoyed doing mundane tasks with telekinesis, Senya chided her about it and attempted to show her how to do things with her own hands. However, her power was growing by the day. She loved watching her brothers train and wanted to be like them. Vaylin trained by herself in the forest and once obliterated a stand of armor in a moment of frustration. In the process, her power sent shockwaves through the trees. By the time she was in her teenage years, she was training under her mother's supervision, but she had difficulty in combat training against the Knights of Zakul. Once again, her anger would lead her to a catastrophic display of power. During a training session, her failure caused her to splinter a guard's staff with her mind. She then lifted up both of her training partners and many of the powerful and approaching knights around them, crushing them all inside of their armor. Unfortunately, Emperor Valkorion had been present. He felt the intense waves of strength emanating from his child. Unlike her brothers, she had inherited much more of his own potential. What's worse is that she reminded him of himself at a younger age. By the time Vitiate was only 9, he had taken over his entire homeworld and stripped his Sith Lord father of his powers. Valkorion was not keen on allowing history to repeat itself. He would not be the victim of his own child Vaylin, and he grew to fear her deeply. Senya went to her husband and implored him to do something about his children. They needed their father's attention in their lives, but Valkorion had other plans. He would take Vaylin away, telling his wife that he was taking her to somewhere she could receive proper training to control her abilities. He took her to a desolate world, however, a world that he knew well, a world that he owed much of his power, Nathema, a planet consumed with storms and devoid of the Force. There, Vaylin was imprisoned within a place known as the Sanitarium, where she would be tortured by the Nathema Zealots. Valkorion ensured that Vaylin's mind and powers were caged, along with most of who she was as a person. She slowly had her identity stripped away piece by piece. She could be subdued and controlled with a single activation phrase: kneel before the Dragon of Zakul. She was thereby transformed from a sweet but a troubled child into a psychopath devoid of empathy, a creation from endless ritual and torture. In the process, she had come to hate her mother, believing that she was responsible for this abuse, abandoned. Senya had always wanted her to suppress her powers, so it only made sense to Vaylin that it was her fault that she was now being tortured into doing so. But something stirred across the stars. Senya began to sense her daughter's distress and anguish, and one night she had a terrible nightmare that showed Vaylin suffering clearly. Resolving to rescue her daughter, Senya ventured to Nathema and carried Vaylin out in her arms. She would fight off the Nathema Zealots in the process, gaining her child's freedom. But when she extended her hand to Vaylin to join her, she only saw hatred in her daughter's eyes. Senya was then dragged away by the Knights of Zakul, and Valkorion walked out to return Vaylin back to her containment. After this terrible night, we must venture a few years ahead. Her mother Senya would again find her daughter, but this time on the battlefield. By then, she had become a monster. Her force powers were capable of mass destruction, and she proved this by totally annihilating an entire army of Zakulian knights that were loyal to her mother. Keep in mind that the Knights of Zakul were each on the level of a fully trained Jedi Knight, battle-hardened through years of military experience and allowed to use both the light and the dark sides of the Force as they saw fit. This army included both the soldiers, heavy machinery, and large gunships, all of which had been crushed and torn asunder by Vaylin's telekinesis. When their leader Senya walked through the destruction, she met up with Vaylin once more. The daughter was strong enough to overpower her mother and tear her lightsaber from her grasp with telekinesis. It is important to remember that of the Zakulian Knights, Senya was said to be the best of them. She was the captain of the Honor Guard, Valkorion's personal entourage. Her power and tenacity is what attracted the Sith Lord to her in the first place, but Vaylin dwarfed her mother's ability by the time that she was very young. Vaylin was able to fully manipulate technology to her will at this point, shrug off direct shots from blasters that were aimed to kill, and shield herself from a massive explosion that killed thousands. But perhaps most impressively, she was able to challenge her brother Arcann in lightsaber combat and put him on the defense. This is an Arcann that had already served his tour in the Eternal Raids. Arcann was considered one of the greatest warriors that the galaxy had seen in this era. This was all while Vaylin's powers were still chained by Valkorion's conditioning. When unchained, Vaylin managed to lift up some of the strongest Knights of Zakuul in the air and one-shot them all with a dark blast of energy. And thankfully in the lore, we know what she used. The Dark Blast is an ability that only the strongest Darksiders can actually activate. It's a way of manifesting the dark side in a visible, physical energy. Arcann was able to do so only with the amulet of Naga Sadao. Later, Valkorion himself perfected the technique. But Vaylin is awesome. Vaylin did it instinctively. From her flagship in space, she razed the Nathema Sanitarium, rendering it to dust and rubble with only her mind. Later, she was able to use battle meditation to make the Eternal Fleet completely invincible. It is an extremely complex ability that requires all of the focus of its user. Even powerful Jedi and Sith Lords are basically helpless when in a state of battle meditation. It's very demanding and often leaves its users drained. But Unchained Vaylin was able to multitask while in battle meditation, defending herself against the Alliance commander, and even summoning a Force Storm while doing so, all at the same time. After his defeat, the spirit of Valkorion had possessed the body of the Alliance commander and was actively working with them to take down his rogue daughter. Valkorion feared the results of her Unchained abilities. So now we have a story and a picture of just how powerful Vaylin was. So what could possibly have caused it? What was different about her that put her beyond the strength of her brothers, that made her match Valkorion? Well, we have to return to a specific ability we mentioned about Valkorion. Valkorion's ability to split his consciousness among many vessels. This is one of the least understood aspects about the Emperor, but we'll attempt to explain, because it plays an important part in our theory about Vaylin. It's a little confusing, so please bear with us. Vitiate was an incredibly paranoid Sith Lord. His caution was one of the things that kept his survival going as long as it did. So while his real body was often hidden away, his consciousness was split up into several different vessels. Vessels that he directed his attention to when they were important. And by attention, we mean his spirit. You see, while Vitiate could separate his consciousness, he actually has only one spirit that can move freely between the bodies of his voices. When his spirit and focus was not present, his voices are still capable of operating independently. They enter a sort of autopilot mode. He would usually direct his focus and put his spirit into a single vessel when it was doing something important though, containing all of his spirit. When Vitiate hollowed out the man named Valkorion and put his consciousness in him, the proxy body ran on an autopilot mode to construct the Eternal Empire. He would even have some affection towards Senya in the beginning. This is who Senya fell in love with, and this is who she started a family with. But remember, this was not Vitiate's whole self in the body, only a piece of his consciousness piloting the meat suit. So it acted somewhat different than he did. Senya later reminisces about this life, stating that while they didn't have a super romantic relationship, that they were at least happy. That was until they had children. When that happened, the Sith Lord Vitiate's full spirit focused itself into Valkorion to investigate the children that he had bore. Valkorion had Arcann and Thexan on autopilot. He only joined his spirit to the body after their birth. Senya describes how her husband became an entirely different person following the twins' birth. He became cold, cruel, and no longer shared in the joy that they had once had in their relationship. For most of the duration of the Cold War, Vitiate's spirit would be focused on Valkorion, and it was while his full spirit was in Valkorion that he would sire Vaylin. Later, he would be forced to rejoin the voice in his Sith Empire, calling his full attention there when the Jedi strike team arrived to challenge him. That body was killed while his spirit was still inside of it, forcing him into a state of recovery. During that dormancy, Valkorion went back onto autopilot. Once his spirit was resurrected by the reborn Darth Revan, he fully joined himself in the Eternal Empire. He shut down all other voices and became whole once again as Valkorion. The reason this is all important is because Arcann and Thexan were conceived while it was only Valkorion's body with Vitiate's consciousness. The boys still turned out incredibly powerful because they were born of two skilled Force sensitives, but they did not have Vitiate's potential since he wasn't whole at the time. Vaylin, however, was conceived when the spirit was focused into Valkorion. So our theory is that this is the reason that Vaylin turned out so strong. She was conceived in the full spirit, and therefore had his full potential. We might say that the boys inherited the most basic of their father's ability, but Vaylin got the parts of him that had already absorbed an entire planet and thousands of Sith Lords in the ritual of Nathema. This is a unique situation, because it only could have happened with this specific Sith, a Sith who moved his essence around several different vessels at a time. Again, this has not been fully confirmed, and may never be, since the story of the Eternal Empire was concluded some time ago. But it didn't stop us from noticing these specific factors lining up to create one of the strongest Force-sensitive beings in the entire Star Wars verse. If our theory is true, then Vaylin was born with the power that Valkorion had to attain through 1,000 years of consuming energy and terrible Sith rituals. Suddenly, her broken power makes total sense. But what do you think, guys? Does our explanation make any sense to you? And tell us, is the Eternal family as interesting to you as it is to us? We find them to be unique Force sensitives because even though they're more dark side leaning, they still find themselves as a third party to the Jedi and the Sith struggle. They don't limit themselves to either part of the Force, and the Eternal Empire would use this to dominate the galaxy for a great time. And of course, Vaylin herself feels less like a person and more like an entity of destruction, just like her father. Until next time, my friends, thank you guys so much for watching the channel in the archives, and as always, may the Force be with you.